Several guys were already on the court, passing the ball around. 3 white teenagers, around 18, and 2 local African-American kids who looked a bit younger. The game was lively but tense. Michael noticed one of the white guys, tall with a tattoo on his neck, roughly shove a smaller player as he tried to drive to the basket. "Hey, watch it!" the smaller kid shouted, clutching his shoulder. "Quit whining, kid," the tattooed guy snapped, tossing the ball to one of his friends. "This ain't preschool." Michael frowned but didn't intervene. He set his bag down by the bench and started warming up, shooting the ball from different spots. His movements were smooth, precise, with the effortless grace that comes from years of practice. Some of the locals on the bleachers, older men sipping coffee from paper cups and reminiscing about old times, began to whisper. "That's Michael, James's boy," one said quietly, his gray hair peeking out from under an old Phillies jacket. "Haven't seen him in a while." "The one in the movies?" another asked, squinting. "Looks like a regular dude." Michael heard them but didn't react. He focused on the game, watching the dynamics on the court. The white guys played aggressively, often bending the rules, but with no ref around, they got away with it. The locals held their own, but it was clear they were irritated by the newcomers' behavior. When the game ended, the tattooed guy, whose name was Kyle, approached Michael, holding the ball under his arm. His 2 friends, Zach and Trevor, stood behind him, smirking. "Hey, man," Kyle started, his voice brash with a hint of disdain. "This is our court. We're here every night. You want to play? You ask permission." Michael stopped, slowly turning his head. His gaze was calm, but there was a strength in it. "Your court?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "Since when?" Kyle snorted, glancing at his friends. "Since we got here," he replied. "This ain't the place for people like you. Go play somewhere else while we're still being nice." The words, "people like you," hung in the air, heavy as the summer heat. The bleachers went quiet. The local kids who'd just been playing stepped closer, their faces tightening. One of them, a skinny kid named Darius, clenched his fists. "What did you say?" Darius asked, his voice low but menacing. Michael raised a hand, gesturing for him to hold back. He didn't break eye contact with Kyle. "Let's get this straight," Michael said, his tone calm but laced with steel. "You think you can come to my court and tell me where to go?" Kyle laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "Yours." He looked around, seeking support from his friends. "Man, you serious? This is a public place." "Public," Michael agreed, taking a step closer. "But this land was bought by my father. This court is his legacy, and I'm no guest here." Zach, one of Kyle's friends, scowled. "No way, that's BS, he said. "You're just making stuff up to sound tough." Michael didn't rise to the bait. He pulled out his phone and opened an old photo, a faded snapshot of his father, standing by a freshly installed hoop, holding a young Michael on his shoulders. He showed it to Kyle. "This is 1987, Michael said. "My father, James Jordan, built this court for people like me. And for people like you, but not for anyone to come here and put others down." Kyle glanced at the photo, but his face stayed defiant. "So what?" he said. "That was 100 years ago. It's our rules now." The tension on the court grew thicker. Darius and his friend Jamal stood close, ready to jump in. The older men on the bleachers started whispering, one of them even pulling out a phone to record what was happening. The air smelled of sweat, rubber from sneakers, and the faint aroma of a distant grill where someone was cooking burgers. Michael took a deep breath. He could have exploded, put Kyle in his place with force or authority. But he remembered his father's words, "Strength isn't in your fists. It's in how you make people listen." Instead, he smiled not mockingly, but with a confidence that made you think twice. "All right," he said. "If it's your rules, let's play. 1-on-1. You win, I leave. I win. You apologize to everyone you've disrespected." Kyle hesitated. He was taller than Michael, but something about his opponent's quiet confidence unnerved him. "Fine," he said finally, tossing the ball to Michael. "You start." The game began. Michael moved quickly but without fuss, outmaneuvering Kyle with an ease that made the crowd gasp. Kyle tried to block, but his movements were rough, clumsy. Michael's first shot was clean, the ball swishing through the hoop. The second was the same. Kyle's face reddened, his breathing heavy. "Not over yet," he muttered, grabbing the ball. But Michael gave him no chance. He played not to humiliate, but to prove. This court was his home. After the third shot, Kyle slammed the ball to the ground. "Screw this," he shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "This ain't your court." Michael didn't respond. He picked up the ball, looked Kyle in the eyes. "You can leave," he said quietly, "or you can stay and learn to respect this place." Kyle clenched his fists, his friends exchanging glances. The crowd went silent, waiting for what would happen next. At that moment, an old man from the bleachers stood up, the one in the Phillies jacket. "Kid," he said, addressing Kyle, "you don't know who you're messing with. This is Michael Jordan, not the NBA one, but the one who grew up here. And this court is his." Kyle blinked, his confidence crumbling. He looked at Michael, then at the crowd, and without a word, turned and walked away. Zach and Trevor hurried after him. Michael exhaled, feeling the tension ease. But he knew this wasn't the end. Kyle and his friends would be back, maybe tomorrow, maybe with backup. And then he'd have to figure out how to make this court a place for everyone again, not a battleground. He turned to Darius and Jamal, who looked at him with respect. "Thanks for not jumping in," he said. "But next time we need to talk to them. Not fight, talk." Darius nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "You think they'll listen?" he asked. Michael smiled, tossing the ball toward the hoop. "They'll listen if we show them this place is for everyone." The sun had fully set, and the court was lit by old streetlights that hummed like nighttime insects. The game resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a sense that something important had just begun, not just for Michael, but for everyone there that evening. Michael arrived just as the sun dipped below the skyline, his silhouette cutting through the dusk. He wore the same gray hoodie and beat-up sneakers, but tonight he carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Inside were a few water bottles, a first aid kit, and a notebook, things he'd learned to bring from years of organizing community events. He wasn't just here to play tonight. He was here to listen, to build something. The court was already alive. Darius and Jamal were there, warming up with a few other local kids, their laughter cutting through the tension. The older men from yesterday sat on the bleachers, sipping coffee and debating politics, something about a recent city council decision to cut funding for public rec centers. Michael caught snippets of their conversation as he set his bag down. "City's more interested in fancy condos than kids' futures," grumbled the man in the Phillies jacket, whose name Michael now knew was Earl. "This court's one of the last places these boys got." "Always been that way," another man, Reggie, chimed in. "They'll gentrify us right out of our own neighborhood." Michael nodded to them as he passed, his expression neutral, but his mind racing. The court wasn't just a place to play. It was a battleground for bigger issues: race, class, and the fight to keep communities intact. He'd seen it growing up, and now, standing on his father's legacy, he felt the weight of it more than ever. As he started shooting hoops to warm up, he noticed a group approaching from the far end of the court. It was Kyle, flanked by Zach and Trevor, but this time they weren't alone. Two older guys, maybe in their mid-20s, walked with them, their postures stiff and their eyes scanning the court like they were sizing it up. One had a shaved head and a chain necklace that glinted under the lights. The other, broader and quieter, kept his hands in his pockets. Darius stopped dribbling and nudged Jamal. "Trouble's back," he muttered. Michael kept shooting, his movements deliberate, but he was watching. The group stopped at the edge of the court, Kyle stepping forward with a smirk. "Yo, Mike," Kyle called, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "You still think this is your court?" The chatter on the bleachers died down. Earl and Reggie leaned forward, their coffee cups forgotten. The younger kids on the court froze, the ball rolling to a stop near the baseline. Michael caught the ball mid-bounce, holding it against his hip. He turned to face Kyle, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "Never stopped being my court," he said evenly. "Question is, what are you here for? To play or to start something?" Kyle's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly, glancing at the older guys for backup. The one with the chain, who Michael later learned was called Nate, stepped forward. "We're here to play," Nate said, his voice low and deliberate. "But we don't like being disrespected. You made a scene yesterday, man. That's not how it works around here." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Around here? You're not from Overbrook, are you?" Nate's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Michael took a step closer, his voice steady but firm. "This court's been here since before any of us were born," he said. "My dad built it so everyone could play. Black, white, rich, poor, doesn't matter. But respect matters. You don't get to walk in and act like you own the place." The crowd was silent now, the only sounds the distant hum of a passing car and the faint creak of the bleachers as Earl shifted his weight. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but Nate held up a hand, silencing him. "You talk a big game," Nate said, his eyes narrowing. "But words don't mean nothing. Let's settle it on the court. 5-on-5. Your crew against ours." Michael glanced at Darius and Jamal, who nodded, ready to back him up. Two other local kids, a lanky teen named Ty and a stocky one called Marcus, stepped forward without hesitation. The court was set. "All right," Michael said, "but we play clean. No cheap shots, no trash talk. Just ball." Nate smirked but nodded. "Deal." The game started fast and fierce. Michael's team moved like they'd played together for years, their passes crisp and their defense tight. Michael wasn't the flashiest player. He didn't need to be. His strength was in reading the court, setting up plays, and staying calm under pressure. Darius was the spark, weaving through defenders with quick crossovers, while Jamal held the paint, blocking shots with a ferocity that belied his quiet demeanor. Kyle's team, though, was no pushover. Nate was a powerhouse, muscling his way to the basket, while the quiet guy, who they called Brody, had a deadly jump shot. Kyle, Zach, and Trevor played with an edge, their elbows a little too sharp, their fouls a little too late. The ref, a volunteer from the neighborhood, named Mr. Thompson, a retired postal worker with a whistle around his neck, called what he could, but the tension was palpable. By halftime, the score was tied at 32. Sweat dripped onto the concrete, and the crowd was on edge, cheering every basket and groaning at every missed call. Michael called his team into a huddle, passing out water bottles. "They're trying to rattle us," he said, his voice low. "Don't bite. Keep it clean, keep it smart. We're not just playing for us. We're playing for this court." Darius wiped his brow, nodding. "They're dirty, Mike. You saw that elbow Kyle threw." "I saw it," Michael said, "but we don't stoop to their level. We show him what this place is about." The second half was grueling. Nate's team leaned harder into physical play, and the crowd started to murmur as fouls went uncalled. At one point, Kyle shoved Ty into the post after a rebound, sending him sprawling. The bleachers erupted in boos, and Mr. Thompson blew his whistle, calling a flagrant foul. Kyle threw up his hands, shouting, "That was clean! You're blind, old man!" Michael stepped between them, his voice calm but commanding. "Back off, Kyle. You're not helping your case." Kyle glared but backed down, muttering under his breath. The game resumed, but the air was thick with unspoken grudges. With 2 minutes left, Michael's team was up by 3, but Nate's squad was closing in. Brody sank a three-pointer, tying the game, and the crowd roared. With seconds on the clock, Michael had the ball. Nate guarded him closely, his breath hot and his stance aggressive. Michael faked left, then spun right, driving toward the basket. As he went up for the layup, Nate's arm came down hard, catching Michael's wrist. The ball rimmed out, and Michael hit the ground, pain shooting through his arm. The whistle blew. The crowd was on its feet, shouting. Mr. Thompson signaled a foul, awarding Michael 2 free throws. Nate protested, his voice rising, but Michael didn't engage. He stood, shaking out his wrist, and walked to the line. The court went quiet. Michael bounced the ball once, twice, his eyes locked on the rim. The first shot went in clean, the net snapping. The second followed, giving his team a 2-point lead with no time left. The crowd exploded, kids jumping and high-fiving, Earl and Reggie clapping from the bleachers. Nate's team was silent, their heads down. Kyle kicked the ground, cursing, but Nate raised a hand, silencing him again. He walked over to Michael, his expression unreadable. "Good game," Nate said, extending a hand. Michael shook it, his grip firm. "Good game. You've got skills. This court's open to you if you respect it." Nate nodded, a flicker of something, maybe understanding, crossing his face. He turned to his team, jerking his head toward the street. "Let's go." As they left, the locals swarmed Michael and his crew, slapping backs and reliving the game's highlights. But Michael's mind was elsewhere. He knew this wasn't the end. Winning a game didn't fix the deeper issues, the resentment, the division, the sense that places like this court were becoming battlegrounds in a changing city. He sat on the bleachers, catching his breath, when Earl approached, his coffee cup still in hand. "You did good out there, son," Earl said. "Your daddy'd be proud, but those boys will be back. And they won't be alone." Michael nodded, his eyes on the court. "I know. That's why we need to do more than play ball. We need to talk, really talk. Make this place what it was meant to be." Earl studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You sound like James. He always said this court wasn't just for games. It was for building something." Michael looked out at the kids, still shooting hoops, their laughter echoing in the night. He felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. This court was his father's dream, and maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of something bigger, a place where people didn't just fight for space, but found a way to share it. He hadn't slept much. The game from a few nights ago lingered in his mind. Not just the victory, but the undercurrent of tension that hadn't dissipated. Nate's handshake had been a start, but Michael knew better than to think one game could undo years of mistrust. He'd seen it growing up, the way gentrification crept into neighborhoods like Overbrook, bringing new faces who didn't always understand the history, and old resentments that flared when people felt pushed out. The court was a microcosm of it all, and Michael felt the weight of keeping it a sanctuary. He'd spent the week making calls, reaching out to old friends, community leaders, and even a few city officials he'd met through his father's connections. His plan was simple but ambitious: turn the court into a hub for dialogue, not just games. He wanted workshops, open mics, maybe even a youth mentorship program, anything to bridge the gaps he saw widening. But first, he needed to bring people together, and that meant facing Kyle, Nate, and their crew again. As if on cue, he spotted them approaching from the north end of the court. Kyle led the pack, his stride cocky, but Nate was close behind, his expression harder to read. Zach and Trevor trailed, along with Brody, the quiet one with the jump shot. A new guy was with them, older, maybe 30, with a buzz cut and a gym bag slung over his shoulder. The group moved with purpose, their eyes locked on Michael. Darius, who'd been shooting free throws nearby, stopped and jogged over. "They're back," he said under his breath. "You want me to get the others?" Michael shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see what they want." The group stopped a few feet away, and Kyle crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "Thought you'd be gone by now, Mike. Guess you're stubborn." Michael met his gaze, unflinching. "This is my home. I don't run." Nate stepped forward, his voice calm but direct. "We're not here to fight, but we heard you're planning something, some kind of community thing. We want in." Michael raised an eyebrow, surprised but cautious. Last time, you were ready to claim this court for yourselves. Why the change?" Nate glanced at the new guy, who nodded slightly. "This is my brother Chris," Nate said, gesturing to the man with the buzz cut. "He grew up in a place like this, back in Pittsburgh. Said courts like this are worth saving, but only if everyone's got a say." Chris stepped forward, his handshake firm when Michael offered his. "I've seen what happens when neighborhoods get divided," Chris said. "People stop talking, start fighting. You're trying to do something different here. I respect that, but it's gotta include US, too." Michael studied him, then looked at Nate and the others. Kyle's smirk had faded, replaced by a guarded expression. Zach and Trevor shifted uncomfortably, like they weren't sure why they were there. Brody just watched, his face neutral. "All right," Michael said finally. "But if you're in for real. This isn't about control. It's about building something. You cool with that?" Nate nodded. "We're cool, but not everyone's gonna like it. Some folks on both sides want things to stay how they are." Michael knew he was right. He'd already heard grumbling from a few locals who didn't trust outsiders getting involved, and he suspected Nate's crew had their own skeptics. But he also knew progress wasn't easy, and it started with moments like this. "Come to the meeting tonight," Michael said. 7 o'clock, at the community center down the block. Bring whoever wants to talk. No games, no grudges, just ideas." Chris nodded, and Nate gave a small, almost reluctant smile. Kyle muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue. As they walked away, Michael felt a mix of hope and unease. This was a step, but the real test was coming. The community center was a squat brick building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read Overbrook Rec. Inside, the gym smelled of polished wood and old sweat, its walls lined with faded banners from long-ago championships. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and a table in the corner held a coffee urn and a tray of donuts, Michael's contribution, courtesy of a local bakery he'd called in a favor from. By 7:15, the room was packed. Earl and Reggie were there, along with a dozen other older residents, their faces etched with skepticism but also curiosity. Darius, Jamal, Ty, and Marcus sat near the front, whispering among themselves. A few parents showed up with their kids, and a city council aide, a young woman named Lena, took notes in the back. Nate's crew arrived late, slipping into the back row, their presence drawing stares. Michael stood in the center, his voice steady as he addressed the room. "Thanks for coming. This court means something to all of us, but it's been a flashpoint lately. We can keep fighting over it, or we can make it a place that works for everyone. That's why we're here, to figure out how. He laid out his vision: regular open games, youth clinics, community events like barbecues and talent shows. He talked about partnering with local businesses to fund repairs, new hoops, better lighting, maybe even a small pavilion for shade. The room listened, some nodding, others crossing their arms. Earl spoke first, his voice gruff. Sounds nice, but who's paying for it? And who's making sure these new folks? He glanced at Nate's crew. Don't try to take over. Before Michael could answer, Chris stood. I get the concern, he said. I'm not from here, but I've seen what happens when people don't trust each other. We're not here to take anything. We just want a seat at the table. A woman in her 60s, Ms. Clara, who'd known Michael's father, shook her head. Words are cheap, she said. This court's been ours for decades. Why should we share it with people who don't know its history? The room tensed. Kyle shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, but Nate put a hand on his shoulder, keeping him quiet. Michael stepped in, his tone calm but firm. Ms. Clara, you're right. This court has history. My dad poured his heart into it, but he didn't build it to keep people out. He built it to bring them together. If we shut out new faces, we're no better than the folks who tried to shut us out back in the day. Ms. Clara's expression softened, but she didn't respond. Lena, the council aide, raised her hand. The city might fund some of this, she said, but only if there's a clear plan and community buy-in. You'll need to show this isn't just talk. The discussion went on for an hour, voices rising and falling. Some wanted strict rules for who could use the court. Others argued for open access. A few teens suggested a mural to honor the court's history, which got nods from both sides. Nate's crew stayed mostly quiet, but when Brody spoke up about starting a skills clinic for younger kids, the room listened. As the meeting wrapped up, Michael felt a cautious optimism. No one had stormed out, and a few people, even Ms. Clara, had stayed to chat with Nate and Chris. But he knew the real work was just beginning. Trust wasn't built in a single night. Later, as Michael locked up the community center, Darius caught up with him outside. The night was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. You really think this'll work? Darius asked, his voice low. Half these people don't even like each other. Michael looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city's glow. It won't be easy, he said, but my dad used to say, you don't change minds with a fist. You do it with a handout. We've got a shot if we keep showing up. Darius nodded, kicking a pebble across the sidewalk. You're all right, Mike, even if you're kind of famous. Michael laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. Keep that to yourself, man. As they walked toward the court, now empty under the moonlight, Michael felt the spark of hope grow stronger. The road ahead was long, but every step, every conversation, every game was a chance to make the court what his father had always dreamed, a place where differences didn't divide, but united. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.